On our bookshelf tonight, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Wesley Lowery examines the pattern of racist violence that follows racial progress in America, including the recent white supremacist violence that surged following Barack Obama's presidency. Lowery recently sat down with Jeff Bennett to discuss his findings, which he details in his new book, American Whitelash: A Changing Nation and the Cost of Progress.
Wesley Lowery joins us now. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thanks so much for having me.
In the book, you look at how and why racist violence has spiked since the election of Barack Obama. And you write, the election of a black president did not usher us from the shadows of our racist past. Rather, it led us down a perilous path and into a decade and a half and counting of explicit racial thrashing. Pick it up from there.
Think about what we've seen in the time since President Obama's election. The rise of a nativist movement, hyper concerned with immigration and refugees, that vowed to ban Muslims from coming into the country and ultimately was able to elect President Trump. We've seen a rise of a civil rights movement of young, energetic, diverse activists attempting to push the country forward on various issues of justice and to push the country beyond perhaps what it imagined it might be willing to consider not that long ago, right? And so we've been in this era where following a black president, we have now been locked even further into the conversations about race and racial justice across the country. One thing that's also true, right, we still live in a majority white country, and we've seen in the polling that in the years since Barack Obama's election, white Americans have become increasingly racially anxious, concerned, right? By the end of the Obama presidency, 55% of white Americans say that they believe they are racially discriminated against, right? So the essence of having one black guy run the country meant that all the white people thought they were now racial minorities and facing systemic discrimination, right? And that speaks to, and one of the things I look at, it speaks to a changing nature of our politics. And then there are people out there, other movements, people who really are avowed white supremacists who look at this and they smile. The idea that so many Americans would be so anxious, so concerned, that these things would be in the forefront this way, they think they can use that to recruit, and ultimately we end up seeing a lot of violent acts being committed by people who join those movements.
In the book, you also capture the stories of people who fell prey to this racist violence. What stories stood out to you?
You know, I think a lot about the story of Marcelo Lucero, who was an Ecuadorian immigrant who was murdered in Long Island not long after Barack Obama was elected, days after the election, prior to the inauguration. And because as much as this book talks about the rise that comes following Barack Obama's election, I tried to be careful and to be clear that Barack Obama inherits a set of issues that were already at play. And so you see Marcelo Lucero, who comes to this country with his brother to seek freedom and seek liberty. And ultimately, at a time when people in that part of the country were very anxious that their property values might fall because of immigration, that there was going to be a competition for resources, local politicians began adapting really dehumanizing rhetoric, so much so that the local high school kids started going out seeking immigrants to attack and beat up. And on one night, they found Marcelo Lucero. And so much of this book is about what our role is, those of us in the public square, public officials, and our role in acknowledging that when we allow dehumanizing rhetoric to take over our politics, the result is that people are dehumanized, and some people among us stop treating those people as humans.
The federal government, as you well know, has warned about this. Both the DHS and FBI have warned about the increased activity and recruitment among white supremacist groups, among right-wing militia groups. Tell me more about how this threat has proliferated in this social media age, in this age where people feel emboldened to say things they wouldn't say and do things they wouldn't normally otherwise. And how is the federal government confronting the challenge?
Of course, we've seen an unquestionable rise. We've seen the FBI director and DHS come out and say that currently the biggest terroristic threat in the United States of America is from white supremacist terror and domestic terror, not foreign or Islamic terrorism. And that those threats can be difficult, and it can be difficult to grapple with, in part because there are First Amendment concerns that might not exist in a more international context, in part because there is a hesitance sometimes and a desire not to label people who might fall on a certain side of the political spectrum as potentially dangerous, right? And so we've seen this kind of time and time again, where law enforcement has been hesitant to aggressively combat and disrupt such movements in such spaces. Increasingly, as you allude to and you note, we now see people gathering in online spaces. That these are not hierarchical big organizations in most cases, but rather the white supremacist movement has adopted what one of its leaders called leaderless resistance, this idea of they're going to put out all this propaganda, they're going to make it available on the internet, and enough aggrieved people will locate it and find it and know what to do. And we've seen this over and over and over again. In Charleston, Dylan Roof starts Googling for information about quote unquote black on white crime because he's been following media coverage of Trayvon Martin's death. And that leads him to these dark corners of the internet that proselytize about the violent threat that black people present to white people and the violent threat that immigration presents to the quote unquote white race, because again, we know that race is not biological that way. And before long, he's writing a manifesto where he's talking about the quote Jewish problem, and he's walking into a black church and massacring people, right? And so much of this movement today is about using these online spaces to proselytize and radicalize without ever having to give direct marching orders.
What sparked your interest in this? What motivated you to write this book?
So my first book was about the rise of Black Lives Matter as a movement. And as 2016 gave way to 2017, I was thinking a lot about what does it mean to be a writer and a journalist who looks at issues of race and justice. And increasingly we were seeing these cases and these incidents of people being attacked or the expression explicitly of these white supremacist ideas that had been socially taboo previously, that there was a clear emboldenment of this movement because our politics was playing footsie with it. That we're seeing white supremacists gather in DC around the inauguration giving Hail Hitler salutes. We're seeing Muslim women being attacked on a train in Portland. We're seeing the shootings in Pittsburgh and Buffalo and El Paso. And so I thought that it was important to use whatever talent or space or resources I had to try to tell some of those stories, to record them for history, but then also to try to put them in concert with each other, to explain, you know, if we're living in a moment of increased racial grievance in this space, we should understand it, because if we understand it, perhaps we can do something to combat it.
The book is American White Lash, A Changing Nation and the Cost of Progress. Already a New York Times bestseller. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I know the viewer is going to help us keep ourselves on the list.
Wesley Lowery, it's good to see you as always.
Thank you, man.